So we're going to play around with the shrink wrap modifier. And the most important thing to remember about this is that what matters most is really what you're shrink wrapping to. And the reason is because if you get that kind of wrong, then you're not going to get a good result by using shrink wrap on top of it. But you can do pretty much anything you wanted as far as it comes to like concept modeling. If you wanted to just make, some kind of little quick shape, bevel out the edges here, do some booleans, whatever the case, it doesn't really matter. Even if you have sharp edges, while you're doing this part anyway. So, but you don't usually want sharp edges when you're using shrink wrap. Okay, just keep that in mind. So, like these things here are almost impossible to get a good lineup on. So you might have to do another bevel on that. Okay, so just keep that in mind. That could be something you want to shrink wrap to if you want to create a sub D model, perhaps. But generally, you want to do something, maybe a little bit more interesting, not necessarily this right here, because we could easily convert that to a sub D model by just doing a little bit of manual work. But so if we were to try, say, doing something else with like subdivision, all right, and we were to go ahead and start working this whole shape out here, trying to make it as interesting as possible. We control two, subdivide it. Maybe we want to skew everything by hitting Control Shift S and then doing a quick mirror. Maybe we got something like this going on. All right. Subdivide it a few more times, maybe convert it to a mesh. We could always go into sculpt mode if we really wanted to and start doing some sculpting. So you use like clay strips. Um, do that number. You can see that's on the wrong axis. There you go. So like sculpting this right now, probably not a great idea. We probably could bump it up in resolution by pressing R and Control R, but we're going to get, a bunch of voxels and stuff like that. So the voxel remesh anyways, we're going to get a bunch of end poles, but we can still sculpt and create ideas super fast as well if we wanted to change up our base mesh here anyways. And so the way this ends up looking as far as the smoothness goes is what you're going to get if you're to shrink wrap to it for the most part. You can be a little bit rougher with it than you probably think, right? But you still want to get it mostly correct. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a little bit of an issue when you start shrink wrapping to it. Just don't forget you can do draw sharp. And if things start to create little dots everywhere, just turn down the spacing. Right. So you can do things like this perhaps. Let's just knock out the front here. Okay, so you can do a little bit of just very generic kind of hard surface sculpting. You won't get a perfect result probably, but you can get pretty close to what you want. You do something like that perhaps. Now, the main important thing here though is that by the end of this, you want those curvier shapes or bevels edges, should I say. So sometimes even this might be, let's say we have like really strong edges in here. You might want to do something like a remesh with the modifier, bump down the voxel size so it becomes a little bit crispier. Do something like smooth, and smooth you can just set to 1 and repeat it a number of times, smooth the whole mesh out a little bit. And so any kind of little lumpiness like this will affect your model. So the base is really, really important. Just keep that in mind. Now, because this is going up to 170,000 triangles here, you could always throw on a decimate after and change it to something like zero point 0.1, just to lower it down a little bit. If you see too much change, it's not good, but generally you can get away with this. Whoops, I didn't want to apply that one yet. Let's go back. I just want to convert them all to a mesh. I'm going to right click, convert to a mesh. All right. Now, when you use shrink wrap, it's almost like doing retopology. Pretty much the same thing. So what I'm going to do is just turn this color a little bit lower real quick and create a plane. Okay. Now you could work off of some other piece of mesh if you needed to. You don't have to necessarily do it like this, but we got a plane. We're going to snap, face project, medium point, align rotation to target, and project individual elements. We're going to go to its properties real quick. Go to viewport display. I'm going to set this to be in front here. Okay. And that way, as we're working, we don't have to worry about not being able to see this thing. We're going to work up to the symmetry and that's it. We're not going to do anything over that. So make sure your origin point's in the center. Go into edit mode. And when you move this, it won't bring the origin point with it. So if I ever want to do a symmetrize with like mesh machine or use a mirror modifier, I can do that. Now with mesh machine, if you click the symmetrize button, it just cuts it in half. Okay. So you don't have to worry about looking at something on the backside over here while you're working. So you just press, select the vertex, press G, maybe, let's see what we got going on here. Got a couple of vertices hanging out. Okay. You can do loop cuts, press G, move them around, just snap them to the surface real quick like this. So you get to start doing retopo basically. And you can do this on hard surface shapes or organic shapes. It's really up to you. Even if you're doing hard surface stuff, sometimes you have to do this because it's hard to hit certain shapes. Like think of like the top of a tank. That one kind of popped up the other day. That it's pretty challenging to get that kind of surface going, right? And so you might have to shrink wrap some things so you can kind of create the designs or the patterns you want on that topology, anyways. So you can do more and more interesting things perhaps at a certain point. So yeah, more or less retopo at this point. You can keep it simple at first and then start to make it more and more complicated because you can always go through and say, like, I want a bevel here. Right, mouse wheel up. Now we've been just snapping to the surface. Shrink wrap just helps keep you in check. So basically, you need this to snap. Otherwise, when you press G and you move something, it might end up way out somewhere, who knows where. And shrink wrap doesn't really like that. So we're going to do the shrink wrap modifier now. And the modifier, you pick your target object, right? And that's the base there. And so you can do different types of modes here. If you're going to use project, set it to negative, okay? But then you can tweak some of these other settings. Near surface point usually works out pretty well for me anyways. And I don't usually mess around with that too much. All right, but we can now shrink wrap and you see how we can't see what we're selecting. Turn on the end result right here, okay? Sometimes you can also turn it off in edit mode and not worry about it so much. But it is nice to see it, so I'll do that personally. And or maybe toggle back and forth between them anyways. So but now you get the opportunity to go through this whole shape and figure out like what you need, especially if you're doing subdivision. This is extremely useful because you're not always sure um, how you need to lay out your topology. And then so when you create like a Boolean ingon or a sculpt first and you get it just the way you like it, you can always go back and clean up that mesh and make it a little bit nicer just by retopoing it. And it's not a big deal after that. So we can go through this whole thing and you can grab whole sections and press E and extrude and then move them around. So the reason you could do that is because we have project individual elements. Now, just be careful if something's on like the back side of something. Like when you do that number, it'll snap to the front side. So don't do that across the whole shape, but you can do it in some areas. Because, like, say right here, let's say we wanted to introduce something like a circle, right? So we say we want a circle in this area. So I do an inset, I do a loop tools, and I click circle. All right. You see, we can do whole patches like this, which is quite useful. Maybe we recircle it one more time and just make sure it's right. Okay. And so now we have a little circle thing going on. Now, this isn't how you should run the topology for a circle, just so you know. You probably want to use more polygons, perhaps, and do something like this, where you select like maybe these four and just circle this one. Probably shouldn't be that big. You want to try to keep this all nice and neat and lined up with each other. And that one, I guess I did wrong still. All right. Maybe we'll do a little bit bigger one like this. Alright. So you'll have to balance those all out again, basically. But you do have the option now to go around and tweak all of this just the way you need it and get it going exactly how you want it. So that's really the power of shrink wrap. In a nutshell, it's very forgiving if as long as you focus on that base shape first and you don't think about trying to do all the topology right off the bat. So I see like this here, I don't like the way this kind of edge is being ran through this area. So I could always just, use the knife tool or add a loop cut and go around and add an extra holding edge there. Maybe I don't like how this is all bunched up. I could scale it and move it down. You see? So there's a lot of opportunity to just tweak things very rapidly and fast. Even though it is technically retopo, most people get scared of that word. It's not it's not something you should really be too frightened of. In my opinion, it's kind of relaxing because once you figured out your design and your shape, it's just about doing until it comes into existence, basically, right? You just keep working it. Like, see, I need a little bit something more right here to work this area, you can see like I need to do this number. Oh, also there's something called the F2 add-on you might find interesting, which will let you select a single corner and then like it'll create another vertex way out here or something like that if you just press F. So in our case, we're not going to use something like that, but you see we can just go through this process super, super fast. It's going to get a little bit more interesting here in just a moment because we're going to start using vertex groups. And so vertex groups, what they allow you to do is um, basically have certain parts of the mesh not react to the shrink wrap, which is nice. Vertex groups are down here in your object data properties section. You see vertex groups here. Every time you create one, it'll show up here. So if you ever get lost, that's what's going to end up happening. There's a little shortcut though where you can use it. You don't need to uh, go over to that panel every time necessarily. You might have to eventually, but you can see we're well on our way. Also, you can do things like Control V and smooth vertices. So this is something, you can use all your tools available to you. Maybe this is too dense in here. We can dissolve something if we wanted to. I think that messed my cylinder up, but oh, it's already messed up from that smooth vertices thing, right? So we'll leave that alone. Maybe we could just smooth these ones here. Don't forget loop tools though. You got things like relax, which can be quite useful. There's a set flow add-on, which still could be useful. Machine tools, Alt A, align left, align right. This is really good if you're working on hard surfaces where you need particular edge angles or edges that are aligned with each other at least. So that's fun. I guess these didn't get combined or just that one? No, just that one. All right. So there we go. So like, let's say this little circle area here. You see, it's all shrink wrap into the surface. Okay. I'm gonna take this whole thing real quick and Control X on it just to do that number. Let's say we want to put a little indent here. Okay. So if I press I and I inset, now what we can do is we press I one more time, hit Control G. We can assign these vertices to a new vertex group. Okay. When we do that, you don't see any effect right away. The reason why is because we have to come to the modifier, hit vertex group, click it. Okay. And now you can see, well, there's some kind of result going on here, but um, we want to switch it because it's actually the wrong way around right now. It's using, like, if you see the only thing shrink wrapping is that little piece in the middle. We want to switch it with this little button that inverts it. So now that everything's affected still except that one little piece, this is where it gets fun. If we were to take this section, press E to extrude it, you'll see we can actually extrude it into the surface now. We're supposed to. Got to turn snapping off for this, okay? Shift tab, you can turn that on and off as needed rather quickly. So, but yeah, we want to push it in. So we turn it off, and we press E, and now we can actually push it in. There you go. So we're not snapping to that surface anymore, which is good. And so we got that out of the way. We could do an inset. You can see it's kind of not exactly what we want. Maybe we want to do a loop tools, circle it real quick, uh, flatten it out or something like that. You don't have to flatten it out necessarily, but uh, certainly can. Okay, and so now extrude it in, inset again, merge at center. And then now, if we hit Control 2 and we subdivide, we can see what kind of results we're getting here. Shade it smooth. All right. Now, we didn't go I don't know why we can't see the gray model in there. Oh, because this is in front, I guess. I thought I would still poke up through there anyways, because this would technically, anyways, no, but if this thing does distract you, right? Sometimes it is distracting. You might accidentally click on it. You don't want to do that. You can freeze it technically by going to visibility and making it unselectable. But it's not really required for this one. Instead, you just press H and hide it, right? If you need it back, hit Alt H, bring it back. Unhides everything when you hit Alt H. So, but you'll still shrink wrap to it, even if you can't see it, which is kind of interesting because now you can say like, start working out in this direction, turn your snapping back on. Okay, oh, and extrude. There you go. So we can still shrink wrap to it, even though we can't see it, which is kind of fun. When you think about it. And so now we can make all kinds of adjustments and changes throughout here. That's not what I want. Go back, press F here. You see how we're having a hard time working with this? This is going to be shrink wraps on, but the subdivision usually is pretty distracting. You could turn on end result where you can actually just work on this isoline display, basically the end result here, the mesh that it creates, but you could turn it off in edit mode as well. and work with it like this for a little while, and then go and head back to the other one as well. So anytime you want to make changes to the vertex groups, you hit Control G now, and you'll see that we get assigned to active group, remove from active group, remove from all, set active group, right? So we have a little menu to work with. We don't have to go over to that panel every time and work with that. So if I press I to inset, hit B, I can do this number, hit Control Z, and I can assign this to active group and maybe pull that down a little bit. So when it subdivides, it does this. And just because you can, you should probably, if you got something that's symmetrical anyways, use a mirror modifier at the very end of this stack. So you can mirror over, you can bisect it, and now turn this off in edit mode. So you'll still, you won't get too confused while working with it at least. And now you can push it over, symmetrize it real quick. I'm gonna make sure I'm lined up here. But you'll see that we can start working this whole section out. All right. And so we'll end up getting something like this. You may also, it should be bisecting here, but it's kind of doing something it wants to do, I guess. Okay, so the mirror before the subdivision. All right, that's the trick. All right, should be, yeah, I was saying merge or whatever, but there you go. And so now you're in business. You could do this all day long. You can make some very quick changes rather rapidly. You can just literally press E, extrude all that down. Like it can get pretty fast if you want it to be. It's nothing wrong with doing stuff like that, right? You can add some loop cuts. Now notice it's not snapping to the surface right now. It's just shrink wrapping. So sometimes you want to grab little sections like this after you create them and just press G. Make sure that it is all snapped to the model here. And you see when I symmetrize that, it's way off too. Let me try. If you hold Alt while orbiting, you can jump into these little side views, bottom and top and whatnot, relatively fast. So I'm gonna just try that number there real quick. I think all of this, I'm just gonna pull it over and then symmetrize it with Mesh Machine. So symmetrizing is huge in my opinion. It saves a lot of time. But if you don't have Mesh Machine, because it is a paid add-on, you can always use something like the Auto Mirror tool to try to create a little um, symmetrized button, if you would. With that, basically, there's a way you set it up where it can do something very similar. So that comes with Blender. You just have to enable it in the add-on preferences, right? And so now we got snapping on, so every time I move these things around, it's pretty much kind of doing what it wants. You can always like take little vertices out and just start doing numbers like that, pressing F to fill real quick. So yeah, that is basically retopo, but it doesn't stop here. It keeps going because you could use multiple shrink wraps with multiple objects. It gets kind of interesting when you start trying to combo it up with more and more stuff. I like to keep things simple personally, so I try not to do things like that too much. Anytime I start finicking around with modifiers a little too much, it kind of slows me down. So I don't really care for that. But I definitely will put shrink wrap to use in this manner occasionally. I don't use it as much as I probably should, but it's definitely something when you're doing vehicles, certain types of vehicles, especially if you're trying to do subdivision on it, extremely useful, but also really good for retopo mesh and stuff. So, but the reason why I said it gets better than this is because certain elements like this here, I can hit Control or hit 4 with machine tools, or hit Shift D, duplicate P, separate selection, go to object mode, select your new selection, and go back into edit mode, or machine tools hit 4, and it's done. You can do things like this, right? So at the very maybe bottom of this stack here, or maybe right here, we can just use hard ops. We'll add a solidify modifier. You could, of course, just add a solidify modifier. Put it before the subdivision or after. It doesn't really matter. It depends on what kind of results you're going for, I guess. You could play around with that and change the orders as needed. But you can see we can still add loop cuts. The only problem with solidify is it's a little confusing in edit mode. I would turn it off in edit mode and then just use it right here. Okay. But sometimes you want to see the end result, so you can also leave that on end result. Oh, solidify doesn't really have that, does it? But you can kind of move things around and get them going. So now you can do, more or less panel lines and things like that if you really wanted to. Start lining these kinds of things up. You can see here. Go back. Oh, split it. Not what I wanted. So more, maybe I want like another one here. split it, right? And then now just solidify it, push that one up. I like them above it. You can see we got a little bit of some gappage going on here. Kind of hard to tell what's going on when we go into edit mode and it might disappear. So that's what I was talking about there when you may or may not want it on in edit mode. Also, it's shrink wrapping right now, but it will snap to other objects potentially. Just keep that in mind. So you have to sometimes hide those in order to stop from snapping to them by accident. In this case, we're not having too many major issues with this, but it could be a thing. Okay, so you keep that in mind. And yeah, so there we go. So now we can start setting up some paneling, some big bold paneling on this one, but change the colors around here. This is that little add-on that I just did a video on that you can download on Gumroad. And just go to my website if you want to check it out. You just have to make sure you turn on a color object here, right, when you're using it. It's pretty simple. Other than that, it just helps you kind of like assign colors real quick, basically, so you don't have to fool around with the materials just yet while you're modeling, because you might not want to. You might just want to keep working and trying to figure things out. You can see here, this solidify up there and turn off in edit mode. Yeah, so some things you may not even need, like additional edges, like these ones. Not in that manner anyways, maybe something more like this for the panel. And so we can kind of push them in there. Yeah, if you're not careful with this though, you will get very kind of artificial looking panel lines and things like that. But you can see it is working, which is good. I'll look cut on that one maybe. You'll have to spend a little bit of time nudging these together perhaps. You can also use creases. I want to mention that when you're doing subdivision surface modeling, you can and should use creases if you need to, or triangles and simple n-gons. You can use those as well as you get things laid out initially. If you're only baking with these things and you're not necessarily trying to like animate them in some kind of VFX stuff or something, you're more than capable of just using whatever topology looks good by the end of the day. So just keep that in mind. You can see that edge there didn't work out too well. We'll bring them back in this manner. Let's turn that solidify off for a second. Can't even see down here on this one what's going on. Let's add a loop cut. Because these aren't technically placed in front, I don't think. Oh, maybe they are because we made it from the original mesh. They should still technically be, yeah, in front. Yep, see, there you go. So now we just have to get these going a little bit better. You could create sections that are like the next, like panel lines you might want to do later when you collapse all this down a little bit more, perhaps, so they hold in shape a little bit better. Then you'll only have to work the corners instead of maybe lining up every little edge like this and hoping you get it right. Okay, but it's a possibility. Also, if you just hit Control C up here, you can Control V it everywhere. So now we also have this great ability that we can hit Shift G. There's all these shortcuts, right? Color, select by color. So anytime you have the exact same color, you can select them all as kind of like a little mini group if you needed to, which is kind of fun and something you might want to try. This one needs a holding edge. You see, we added that whole loop all the way around. If I press G right now, it will snap. You see, it'll cause a major error. Don't do the whole edge. Just do what you can see. Sometimes, like you might want to even avoid some areas when you do that, like that particular. Whoop, it went the wrong way, anyways. So maybe we just do this little area here first. Press G, and it'll snap it back to the surface. So it'll keep it kind of behaving well and won't create like weird lines for the most part. You still do have to balance your geometry out. So don't, if you don't have to cram things, then don't cram them. Space it out evenly, make it all look nice and subdivide perfectly, which will work out quite well as you wanted to do that. So the whole reason I wanted to do that in this particular area is I want to try to get this separated. And you can see I don't want the topology skewing around too much because maybe I just want to, solidify this little section here. pull it out and maybe I want to bump it up and give it like some kind of little color or something. I don't know. We could probably snag this color and put it over here as well. All right. So there we go. This whole section. You can also separate things. You press P and just straight separate them if you really wanted to. I'd probably do that a little bit later on, not right off the bat. But it is a possibility. You can see I kind of missed our little section here. So maybe I place the origin point to this geometry. Oh, try that again. Nope, it has an error because of that. Okay. I'm not going to try to figure that out right now, but usually you can place the origin point, no problems. I don't know what's doing that. Hmm, interesting. All right. So we won't mess with that for now. We'd probably have to like collapse something and then re-shrink wrap it, or it might get kind of weird. It's just little things you have to deal with sometimes, right? So it might be any number of things occurring there. Maybe make this one. Um, yeah, we'll just leave it like that for the most part. So yeah, we could do the whole back section here as well if we had to, but I think all in all, in a nutshell, this is probably something you're going to utilize a lot. I think you should enjoy this. If you enjoyed this video, though, go ahead and leave a like, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below if you want to have any ideas for some other videos or anything. Might make one on it. And till then, all right, take care. I'll see you next time.